look at what Dan Quinn has done in his career, he has been a guy who has been adaptable. He's adapted to kind of what offenses are doing. Obviously, his cover 3 system in Seattle was one that was the dominant force in the league for a while. Teams figured out how to beat it or how to put it in conflict. He goes to Atlanta. Eventually, he's like, we got to tweak this thing. He makes the tweaks in Dallas. They're great on defense. You look at what he's done, some of the things that are through lines, the principles, and this roster, which is going to look very different, but there are some pieces that we imagine will be here. Early thoughts on the fit. It really, because like they can remake the team over time.
Right.
But when we look at 2024, early thoughts.
So what I'm fascinated by, right? I mean, we all expected to be a 4-3, right?
Yes.
I mean, so let's start there. What I'm fascinated by is he played a lot of man in Dallas, right? You mentioned the cover 3 with the Legion of Boom, and sure, but that was an aggressive cover 3. That wasn't a, off man, like they were in people's face at the line of scrimmage, right? So I just assume we're going to see a blend of things, but I would think that you're going to probably see more of what he ran in Dallas, depending on the personnel. Like if Kendall Fuller is re-signed, you probably shouldn't run more man, right? If I guess and Emmanuel Forbes was drafted to be a zone corner, right, with his eyes, and so right now you would think, okay, wait a second, zone fits, but Kendall Fuller may not be back. So if Kendall Fuller's not be back, who I don't think you can play man with him consistently, can you convert? Again, Emmanuel Forbes into more of a man corner. Can you get something out of Christian Holmes, who was a man corner at Oklahoma State when he was drafted? Can you, who's the other guy that I'm thinking about? Benjamin St. Juste, who was
the
more
wild card in all of
right,
this.
but he was more of a man press guy at Minnesota, right? I remember talking to his former defensive coordinator, and obviously in the tape. So I'm curious to find. I think what kind of primary, and maybe you have a different opinion, and obviously you watch way more tape than I do. I'm kind of curious to see what happens with Kendall Fuller, and that'll be maybe an indicator, if Dan doesn't come out and say, what kind of coverage we're going to see more of on the back end.
Which, to be clear, he won't.
Yes.
Why would you give that away before the season? Maybe, there's going to be – I think there's probably going to start with a mix, and then, over time they adapt and evolve. But you would agree with that in general? Yeah, no, I think Fuller could be a bit of an indicator, but also Kendall might just want to go somewhere else.
Right,
I think Kendall's probably enjoyed both of his stints here. I think this does feel like home for him. But if he wants to win another ring, with where he is age-wise, getting in his late 20s, he's probably going to wind up going somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point. Forbes is fascinating because he was so poorly coached last year. Like what can real NFL defensive backs coaches do with him? And God forbid, Benjamin St. Juste finally developed some ball skills. And I think the key to me is the biggest wild card, because 2 years ago, and even early at times last year, he's in position all the time to make plays. And he just is so incapable of finishing them. And it's really frustrating for everyone, including Benjamin. And it's always been who he's been. It's who he was at Michigan, Minnesota, and then every year in Washington. If they can work with him on that, and by the way, Dan Quinn's Dallas defense is the most ball-hawking defense that there was the last couple of years. Diggs a couple of years ago, Daron Bland this past year, he becomes a really fascinating piece.
Really fascinating. And I think, I don't know how you feel about this. I can't remember what you guys said during the season, but maybe I'm missing something. I don't want him in the slot.
I don't mind him in the slot,
Okay.
actually. He's actually showed
because of his size.
all right. Well, he's got this combination of size and feet that is just rare.
It's not that he's bad. I think for me, his skill set translates more to outside. But
traditionally, but I think the how do I want to put this? The profile, that's actually the right word. The profile of a slot receiver has changed. Like
that's
slot
true. That's true.
Used to
You're
always look like Santana Moss.
You're right. You're
now
right.
all of a sudden you got
you're right.
Do you have Jackson Smith and Jigba?
Yeah.
Sure, but you've also got CeeDee Lamb, who lines up in the slot all the time.
Well, and just to that point, right? Even when you don't have a bigger natural slot receiver, teams say when they're game planning, and of course this makes sense, is they'll take a 6'3", 220-pound receiver, or maybe even a bigger receiver than that, and say, okay, because I know that team plays with a smaller, thinner nickel, I'm going to take advantage of that matchup as opposed to, so you could do different things. The whole genesis of the point is, I think, I don't want to speak for you, is Dan Quinn has shown an adaptability through the years, like you said, cover 3, aggressive at the line of scrimmage, though, with it, not just playing off-man coverage or anything like that, or off coverage, I should say, then kind of a mix of everything in Atlanta, and then kind of, more man and more, I guess, aggressive, if you will, in Dallas. And we all know the ball hawk skills and all that stuff. I'm so intrigued to see how it's going to ultimately look, but I don't know if we know how it's going to look until we get the personnel to see, okay, what they're planning.
And look, let's be clear, that could be years away.
Yeah.
I say
no,
years,
you're right.
not 7, like 1
right.
to 2. But I will say the thing that excites me about Quinn on a principle level is he marries rushing coverage as well as any DC in the league. And part of the reason that those corners in Dallas get all those picks is because they know the rush is going to get home. He generates pressure. And don't forget, Dan Quinn was a D-line coach. That's his background.
Yeah, you're right.
And so he knows how to use the pieces, which is why, I want to say there's not an amount of money I wouldn't pay for Brian Burns to try to get him out of Carolina. But with all that, with the league leading amount of cap space, I'm not getting outbid for Brian Burns.
Here's the thing that I was thinking about.
He's probably going to get franchise tag.
Yeah, I was going to say, right.
Which I would not trade a bunch of stuff for him. But, there's a couple of guys where I'd be like, how do I get my hands on that guy? And it's frustrating that Sweat could be a phenomenal player for them here, but, and it's a thin edge class. But it is something that's going to, I think, be fascinating. I think the other really interesting football thing, and I've said this a couple times, so I can get a quick reaction from you so I don't bore my audience with the same point for the 7th time in 2 days, but that Dallas defense was super light through the middle, and that was kind of their Achilles heel. He's inheriting John, Daron, and Jamin.
Yeah.
That is a thick spine to your defense.
Right.
And then we'll see, obviously, if Cam Curl is re-signed as well.
Sure.
I think that's going to be the most fascinating thing. Like, the back end, interesting. The front 7, how he chooses to build and attack that, I think is the key to the whole thing.
No, that's a great point, absolutely. And I hadn't really talked about the point. The one thing I would ask you then is if you're looking at this defense right now, besides the obvious, again, making decisions on Fuller and Cam Curl, and maybe your philosophy, is Mike like a true Mike linebacker, or is it a true edge rusher, whatever we define that as, whether it's a 4-3 end or, a chameleon-type guy like Micah Parsons turned out to be, or I guess an outside linebacker in the 4-3. Like, what is the most important one-piece cornerstone element that this team has to add right now, this offseason?
That's a great question, because I'm thinking back. The best player on the Seattle defense was probably Earl Thomas. So they had this unbelievable safety, which is the whole key to their cover 3, right? Dallas, the best player, and the key to everything they do is Parsons. So I think what's very clear is you need like an A-level stud, and then you build it around that. Because Earl Thomas made cover 3 work because the middle third of the field wasn't actually a third. It was 5/8.
He was a pencil eraser.
Yeah, he was just like, okay, you guys get the boundaries,
right.
and I've got everything between the numbers. I would say a stud edge would be the number one thing. But, that Seattle defense also had Bobby Wagner. So that seems pretty
Well, that's where I'm
well.
leaning. Like a true – when was the last time this team had a true dynamic Mike? London Fletcher in his prime.
Yeah.
Right? It's been a long time.
It certainly has.
You don't see them working with Jamin Davis to try and do what this staff did in his rookie year, right? To try and convert him to a true Mike,
I doubt
right?
it. But maybe.
Maybe.
But is Barton under contract?
I don't know. He was a one-year deal.
He was a one-year guy. So
and Khalil Hudson is a free agent as well.
Yeah. So
not that he's a true Mike. But,
no, he's definitely not a Mike.
Mayo, I think, is a free agent as well. But
see where Ron gets it up. That's where you'll find David Mayo. All due respect to David Mayo,
Yeah.
who's very good at the very few things that he does very well. Was that nice enough?
It was nice.
We're gonna make it.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm excited.
I'm excited to see what they do with it. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be talking about it, obviously. A lot of speculation until they start playing games, but through it all, Chris Russell 1-4 on the team 980. Of course, our show 4 till whenever there's a basketball game on any given day.
Like 6:45 tonight.
Like 6:45 tonight, which means what happens at 6:15?
Dave Johnson.
Hey, he really does listen to the show.
I listen.
He listens.
I listen.
It's funny. My wife sometimes will be like, "Why did you just turn into Jerry Seinfeld?" So I'm going to ask you, why did you just turn into Jerry Seinfeld? I listened to the show.
Well, you've got the Jewish part down, and I've got the New York part down, right?
Bingo, bango.
So, I mean, there you go. Right? That is right?
Yes,
okay.
that is correct.
Certified. I just want to make sure.
I'd be like, Chris, we have to talk.
I just want to make sure I remembered that correctly.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. All right, when we get back, a little bit more on Dan Quinn, some more thoughts on the offensive side of the ball, and then Dave does join us coming up at 6:15.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.